Hello to all of you. We continue this week to discuss Descartes, and before, let me just say that we'll slow down a little bit because Descartes is a little bit difficult too, as you could all see when you read it and in your comments and so on. So this week we'll spend some time only on meditation 3 and 4. We will not read at all 5 and 6 actually. You are more than encouraged to do so if you want on your own, but we will not spend time in class on 5 and 6. So next week we'll move on to Berkeley. But this week we'll spend time on 3 and 4, and especially about the argument for God's existence. So I know that often people do not want to talk about God and do not want to talk about their faith and so on. So I acknowledge that it may be difficult for you to open up, but it's not. I want to emphasize at the same time, it's not about your own faith. It's not about how you perceive God and whether you believe in God or you do not believe in God. We're talking in philosophy about arguments. So you'll see that in this video I'll talk about arguments for God's existence, and in the future, in the next video, I will talk about an argument against God's existence. If we say that an argument is bad, let's say an argument for God's existence, if that argument is bad, we do not prove anything about God. What we prove something is about the argument itself. So we would claim that the argument does not show that God exists. There may be other arguments, or maybe there are no arguments about God's existence and so on. But the point is that we do not discuss here and now your own faith. We discuss possible arguments for God's existence or possible arguments for God's non-existence. So anyway, you do see on your notes that you have on D2L this week several things about various arguments for God's existence, and you saw that the three main arguments are ontological, cosmological, and teleological, or from design. Descartes' argument is an ontological argument. Forgive me. Ontological arguments are a priori. What does it mean they are a priori? It means that they prove something prior to experiencing anything. For example, a statement like this: one thing cannot be in two places at the same time, has to be known prior to existence. Prior to experience. I don't have to experience things in order to realize that one thing cannot be at the same time in two different places. I understand that with the mind. So Descartes' argument for God's existence will work on that. We'll try to show that God's existence is real without having any reference to experience. There are various arguments for God's existence, and you have some of them, as I mentioned already, on your notes. And the ontological one is based on the reductio ad absurdum reasoning. The reductio ad absurdum reasoning is a very interesting argument. So why? Well, first of all, it begins from a false premise. Even more than that, it begins with the premise that claims the negation of what I want to prove. So, for example, if I want to prove that God exists, then I have to begin with the premise God does not exist. If I want to prove that the sky is blue, then my first premise in the argument will be that the sky is not blue. And you have on your first page, please follow the notes when you watch this video, you have the simplest example, which is the pain argument about the E. coli. So E. coli, which is a bacteria, I want to show, forgive me, that E. coli does not feel pain or cannot feel pain. What do I have to do? I have to begin an argument, if I construct the reductio ad absurdum reasoning, that claims that E. coli can feel pain. So that's the first premise in the argument. The second premise is, if a creature can feel pain, then it must have a central nervous system. Which I think you agree with me, because you cannot have any kind of pain unless you do have a nervous system. If my brain doesn't work, if the nerves do not work, you can cut my hand and I will not feel anything. So I have to have a nervous system in order to feel any pain, right? So I'm guessing this is a true statement. The third statement is, if a creature has a central nervous system, then it has more than one cell. Well, clearly, a nervous system is composed by various cells, right? So it's not the true statement. Putting all those three statements together, we get to the conclusion that E. coli has more than one cell. It is a modus ponens argument, and we haven't talked about it in this class, but it's a developed form of a very simple argument. The point is that the argument is constructed in such a way that the argument is valid, which means it has a perfect structure. It begins with a premise that is a negation of what I want to show, and all of the other premises are true. And if I have true premises in an argument that's valid, I cannot get to a false conclusion. But here in this one, I get to a false conclusion because E. coli, being a bacteria, does not have more than one cell. So it must be that one of the premises is false. Which one is false? The first one. So E. coli cannot feel pain. E. coli can feel pain is a false premise, which means that E. coli cannot feel pain. So I just demonstrated what I wanted to show. I hope it makes sense. I know we haven't done much logic, being an online class and so on. But I hope it makes sense. Anyway, so you have Anselm's argument for God's existence, which is one of the most powerful arguments that have been ever constructed, and it's been discussed for centuries, actually more than 1,000 years, and people still are trying to see how it works and what premises are true or false, and whether it indeed shows that God is real. But I will speak now a little bit about, since the video is getting long, I will speak a little bit about Descartes' own argument for God's existence. And one of the questions online is for you to find it and to talk about it. Now, Descartes says something like this. I can make mistakes. How do I know that? Well, I spent the first two meditations showing that. Often I perceive things that maybe are not real, or maybe I perceive them wrongly. I see from a distance that something is coming towards me, but that thing is different than what I initially thought it was. So perception often makes me believe things that are not true. This means that I am not a perfect being. By the way, he claims that we have two faculties now in this third and fourth meditations. And the two faculties are the faculty of free will and the faculty of the intellect. One of them is perfect. We are perfectly free. We can think anything, we can do anything. The other one is not perfect, the intellect. And that's why error comes in. But, the question may be, why are we created in such a way, imperfect? Regardless of that, even if we are imperfect, as human beings, we can still understand what perfection is, right? So if I say perfection, you would understand the notion. But Descartes claims something very important. He says that all things have causes, including the notion of perfection. The notion of perfection is perfect itself. In order for it to be perfect, it has to be created by a cause that is itself perfect. Why? Because there is nothing in the effect that was not previously in the cause. Nothing comes out of nothing. It has to be there already prior to it, right? So, how can this idea of perfection be created? Either comes from me, or it comes from outside of me. I simplify things. He talks about three different ways, but let's just talk about these two for a moment. If it comes from me, I have to be perfect. But I just said I'm not. So I cannot create the idea of perfection itself. So it must come from outside of me. Well, where from? It could come from other human beings, like me, but that cannot be the case, because they themselves are imperfect, because they are human beings. Or it must come from a being that is perfect, and that can only be God. So Descartes says, I just proved, only using the mind, without using any kind of experience, that God is real. How did I prove that? by saying that I have the idea of perfection. The idea of perfection must have a cause that is perfect itself. The only cause that can be perfect is a perfect thing. I am not a perfect thing, it must be from outside of me, and that is a perfect being, which I call God. So this is pretty much Descartes' argument for God's existence. I know you also have a question online about that. Please make sure that your comments on this video are different than the comments that you have about this question, because in this video we talk a little bit more about other things as well, not only about Descartes' definition, or forgive me, argument for God's existence. Okay, let me create the other video now.